everyone, it's Aaron, Ride XP, and welcome back to the channel. So, I finally got to ride a bike I'm very excited about, which is the Aprilia Tuareg 660. Ever since I rode the T7 and came away unimpressed, I'd been dying to ride this bike to see if it might be the right bike for me. So, when I got my hands on this bike, I had three main questions. Number one, more than anything, is that if it's as good as people say, and nearly everybody says it's really good, why isn't it more popular? Two, could this be the middleweight adventure bike I'm waiting for, which is a more manageable and kind of technically superior alternative to the Yamaha Tenere 700? And finally, as a short rider with average skill, is the Tuareg just accessible enough to consider skipping or upgrading from the 450 class, which is like the Himalayan 450 and the 450 MT? Well, after a week of riding both on the road and on some frankly inappropriate off-road terrain, I think I have some answers. Okay. Now, before we dive in, I'd like you to know that there's a spreadsheet linked in the description where you can compare specs at a glance of the Tuareg, T7, Cove 800X Pro, KTM 790 Adventure S, and just for comparison, the Himalayan 450 and 450 MT. With that, here's my big picture take. Judged on its own merits, the Tuareg 660 is hard to beat as a fun, relatively easy to ride middleweight ADV with class-leading on and off-road capability. It's like a slightly smaller T7 with suspension that's getting up to the quality of the KTM 890 Adventure R at a fraction of the price. It has premium electronics like customizable ride modes and cruise control, and has a high overall fit and finish. I loved riding it, and in general I just really missed kind of like the sound, feel, and power of a middleweight twin cylinder. Basically, I want one, but not yet. So let's tackle probably the most important question. If the Tuareg is so good, why don't we see more of them? Well, the first and obvious reason is that it's Italian, so it's more expensive and carries a reputation, fair or not, for being unreliable, especially compared to the undisputed reliability king, the T7. And with fewer dealers and owners, it's harder to find support, parts, and accessories. So if you plan to ride hard off-road or even across continents, there's a real risk to that. Though for mostly road-based weekend adventure touring, it might not be a big deal. Now, talking about that price, in the Philippines, the Tuareg costs about 50,000 pesos more than the T7 right now, at about 750,000 pesos. But for that price, you get a lot over the T7. 10 more horsepower, a smoother and more refined overall experience, lower seat height without compromising capability, one of the best menu systems, cruise control, traction control, although the new T7 has that already. You have an optional quick shifter, and most of all, I think, suspension that some say is at par with the KTM 890R. So with that, there is value. So the real question is reliability and cost of ownership. And I can't answer any of that firsthand. Aprilia Tuareg, where I got this bike from, tells me that the Tuareg isn't nearly as issue-prone as their big sport bikes. The demo unit I used, though heavily beat up from an adventure rally, FJ Mountain Cross 4, only had a malfunctioning fuel gauge. I also inadvertently proved how tough, durable the Tuareg was when I really beat it and myself up on a hard trail and rode it home perfectly fine. All the reviews I've watched have confirmed that by and large, it has proven mostly reliable over many, many miles. Though, again, it doesn't have the huge data set you would get from a bike like the T7. I mean, that said, I don't think it's a stretch to assume that the T7 will be cheaper to repair and own over the long term. And I have read particularly like the first run having these persistent issues with the front forks, although those have reportedly been resolved. So again, when it comes to reliability, I can't tell you anything definitive, but that the indications seem to be good enough that I wouldn't be too worried about it, at least for the kind of riding I plan to do. So if we consider that the current price premium over the T7 is worth it and that it can be reliable enough to live with for someone like me, what might be other reasons that it's not as popular? Well, when I looked into it, in my view, it's the other competition, aside from the T7, that also puts the Tuareg in an awkward spot. So, at current prices, again, $750K for the Tuareg, the Tuareg goes head-to-head with the 2025 KTM 790 Adventure S, which is only $649K. And the Norden 901, which right now is basically the same price. Now, most riders in this price bracket in this country will definitely lean toward the bigger name, higher displacement bikes. And I mean, let's face it, 900 is going to be greater than 660 to the average premium bike buyer. Personally, I would be less tempted by the 901 and more tempted by the 790S. It has a lower seat height in the low setting, 840 millimeters versus 860, and it has an even lower center of gravity than the Tuareg with those underslung tanks, and then it's gained adjustable suspension, and it's always pumped out 13 more horsepower and 17 more Newton meters of torque. It mainly loses out on off-road performance, suspension travel, and ground clearance, reliability, and KTM's general status in limbo, and arguably style. So for me, especially since I already have a Japanese reliable bike and I'd be willing to own a Euro bike, I'd be remiss not to seriously consider the 790S. But it's not just the 790S. First and foremost, there is the Cove 800X Pro, with a derivative of that 790 engine and with a real-world measured weight of just 196 kilos, less than 200 kilos at that displacement, with a full tank of 20 liters of gas. It's just not really available in this country, and I guess many other places. There's only one Cove 800X here. I don't even know if it's the Pro model. But if it were available here and priced like it is abroad at 600,000 pesos equivalent, it's basically the best value in this class, period, at a class-leading weight as well. So that's why my buddy Stavro, shout out, did tell me that.
Is it a worthy one bike garage bike? I would say it is. If you squint and don't think about Cove 800X Pro, then yeah.
But just to be fair, the Tuareg's refinement is far beyond that of the Coves. And then there's the CF Moto 800 MTX at just 677K, which basically sits in between the 790S and 890R, while also possibly being a little more reliable and definitely cheaper to own. And of course, there's the other Japanese options. First, the Suzuki V-Strom 800DE at about the same price almost at 759K. Now, by most accounts, that is a great bike with an awesome engine and great suspension that needs basically no upgrades. But it also suffers from a paper comparison problem, just like the Tuareg, if not more so. Basically, one gets the feeling it was priced according to how much more it offers than the T7, and for me, the big downside is that it's almost a heavyweight bike. Not very compelling on paper for the price, but if you ride it, you realize that it is a bike that deserves its price while also hopefully offering Japanese reliability. And finally, we have perhaps the most compelling option for a road-biased middleweight adventure bike, the 2025 Honda Transalp XL750, which gives you reliability, proper 21-inch front, and more than 90 horsepower for just under 600,000 pesos. Now, for me, realizing that most of my off-road on these bikes will be on like easy 2-track, I seriously have to consider this bike. So considering all of this, I think the Tuareg 660 is just in a tough spot. It's more premium but doesn't provide the peace of mind of the T7, and it's less aspirational than the KTMs, which are kind of like universally considered the off-road weapons in this class. And then the Cove and the Transalp are cheaper, more powerful, and seem to be pretty close in accessibility. I think in this regard, the Aprilia wins if you think of it as something like you get the 890R suspension in a bike that's much more accessible in basically every way compared to the big 890. So on that note, on to question 2. Is this the middleweight adventure bike I've been waiting for? Yes and no. In hindsight, unrealistically, I was hoping for the Tuareg to be the perfect blend of power and manageability for my height, skill, and budget. I wanted it to be my personal unicorn, basically. Like the T7 minus the quirks that turned me off that bike in a previous review. To be fair, in many ways it was. It had the lower seat height and center of gravity, so it was noticeably easier to balance and lean, and it was more nimble in traffic. I mean, it's not a low bike by any standard at 860 millimeters or about 34 inches, but it's certainly less of a handful than the T7. The ABS is easy to turn off via the mode button, and it remembers your settings, which, to be fair, the newest T7 does, but the 2024 one I tried wouldn't even let me shut off the ABS with the ABS switch. But despite all that, for hard off-road, for technical single track and all that stuff, I just realized the hard way, still too much bike for me, just like the T7. I'd need to significantly level up my off-road skills and courage to take advantage of the Tuareg's kind of technical superiority over the T7. Now, if you really want to know about the difference in performance and subjective feel between the Tuareg and the T7, there's lots of great reviews by expert riders, and here's my favorite one. It's actually an article. Now, what I can tell you firsthand is that I just don't ride with the speed, skill, and guts for those differences to really matter. At least, I don't expect them to. On top of that, I actually still much prefer the visual edge, the overall look of the T7, along with the character and low down torque of that CP2 engine off-road.
Okay. It definitely has more pickup from the bottom. It's more abrupt, but it's actually really nice. Just as I thought, I really still like this engine. It is such a peach. Once you're standing up like this, it's really not a big difference. Feels good.
So, what I'm saying is, even though the Tuareg I think is definitely better than the T7 in all the ways I expected, I'm just still not at a point where I would say those improvements make it a viable bike for me to take on anything but kind of the easiest off-road terrain. Where the Tuareg does clearly pull ahead of the T7 is on the road. That 270-degree twin is familiar and fun, but unlike the T7, it's quick and lively when you rev it out. Go down the gears and it really comes alive as you hit about 5,500 RPM. It's not a rocket, but it's sprightly while being refined. So it offers that additional dimension of fun for road riding and for the fast rider in general. Where the T7 just felt a little soft, especially knowing what that engine is capable of in the form of, say, the MT-07 and XSR 700. Handling in the twisties on the Tuareg is exceptional for a big adventure bike with a 21-inch front. It's nimble and confident, not vague, even with these aggressive Mitas Enduro Trail XT Plus tires. The seat is definitely comfier than the T7s, and the brakes, especially the rear, are a slight step up, though still soft overall, so they're still good for off-road use. And you get cruise control, and I mean, once you try this, it's hard to go back. Wind protection is also pretty good with this wide, non-adjustable windscreen. So basically, you get all the goods of fun performance, good handling, and good comfort that you expect from a bike of this class, and definitely a step up from the T7 in that regard. Its one immediately noticeable weakness as a travel bike is just basically not having any luggage rails. The demo unit I had did have pannier racks, which helped, and I could tie luggage to. It also does have a bubble of engine heat right under the seat.
It's getting pretty hot now between my legs. Not scrambler hot, just warm noticeably.
But I have read that it mostly goes away with a cat delete. So overall, for a rider like me, the Tuareg isn't vastly superior to the T7, but it is a noticeable improvement in many ways that will add up if you ride it often and far, whether in traffic, in the twisties, on the open road, or off-road. So for me, though the Tuareg is an off-road biased adventure bike like the T7, and again like a smaller, skinnier 890R, where it's a winner for me as a potential bike to own is really as a fun, comfortable touring bike with all the electronic toys for safety and fun, great for unpredictable roads, and having that kind of peace of mind and satisfaction of owning a high-spec bike whose capability far exceeds mine. And so we come to the final question. Is the Tuareg accessible enough to consider skipping the 450s and, well, the 390s for that matter? For hard off-road, I'd say no, straight up. Because even though the Tuareg isn't much heavier than the 450s, those 10 to 15 kilos and inches of seat height lost do matter when you're on a long day of riding and you're scared, tired, stuck, or picking it up solo. I was honestly shocked at how small the Himalayan 450 seemed after I gave back the Tuareg. The 450s are still easier to throw around while being just above half the price. Now, don't get me wrong, they're not CRF 300s, but the 450s are a good 15% easier on the hard stuff, and that adds up over a hard day of riding in your energy, not to mention your bank account. And those differences were surely widened with the new KTM 390s. But if you're just thinking of proper adventure touring with the occasional dirt detour to two-track and fire roads and that kind of stuff, or quick Sunday blasts, it's an easy choice. I'd pick the Tuareg any day.
That was nice.
You know, when you choose a more exotic bike, you must allow yourself to forget how much money you paid and focus on enjoying the upgrade, while also being realistic about what you're willing to put these bikes through. But the thing about the Tuareg is that it's just within reach compared to the likes of the Ducati Desert X, the KTM 890 Adventure R, the BMW F900 GS, and the Tiger 900 Rally Pro. And there lies both its appeal as an Italian ADV I can afford, and perhaps also its weakness in the market, as in, if I'm spending for a premium ADV, why not go for the best? I do have a soft spot for this bike in that it's so purpose-built, just engineered to be, you know, the T7, but with all of these quirks solved, and yet it's so underappreciated. I personally can imagine living with this bike here in the Philippines, where basically my tours rarely go beyond 3 days and 500 kilometers away from home. And even if I did own one, I wouldn't use it for hard off-road, full stop. And like say for the next FJ, I would still really rather ride a 390 Enduro R, F450 GS or stick with my Hemi 450. Owning a Himalayan 450 for adventure touring and an MT-07 for fast road rides, the Tuareg is one of the most compelling one-bike solutions out there, with a little retro flair and Euro sex appeal to sweeten the deal. Now, it's not time for me to upgrade. I'm not about to make a video about I sold my Himalayan 450, here's why. But the Tuareg and the new Transalp are definitely at the very top of my list if and when the time comes to get a bigger adventure bike. And that's it. Thanks for sticking around. I hope this was of value to you. I'm not trying to convince you to buy a Tuareg, though I've clearly convinced myself. But anyway, you know, whether your heart's set on a T7, a KTM, a Tuareg, a Transalp, or something else entirely, I hope this gave you some useful insight. With that, I'll see you on the next adventure.